Rain hammered against the windows of Lincoln Middle School as 12-year-old Marcus Chun packed his backpack with unusual care. While his classmates rushed toward the buses, chattering about weekend plans and video games, Marcus had something else entirely on his mind. For 3 weeks now, he had been taking the long way home through Millfield Woods, following strange sounds that seemed to call to him from deep within the forest. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had noticed his distraction during science class. She had asked him twice to pay attention when she was explaining animal behavior, but Marcus could barely focus. The sounds he heard in the woods were unlike anything in their textbook. They were musical, almost like a song, but filled with such sadness that it made his chest ache. Today felt different, though. The storm had been building all afternoon, and something told Marcus that he needed to investigate the woods today, no matter how dangerous it might be to walk through them during a thunderstorm. His parents would be furious if they knew what he was planning, but Marcus had always been the kind of kid who followed his instincts, even when they led him into trouble. As the school buses pulled away, Marcus shouldered his backpack and headed toward the edge of town. Millfield Woods stretched for miles beyond the suburban development where he lived, a dense forest of oak and pine trees that most people avoided. There were stories about the woods, whispers among the older kids about strange lights and weird noises. Most adults dismissed these as imagination, but Marcus had heard the sound himself. The rain soaked through his jacket within minutes of entering the forest, but Marcus pressed on. He followed the familiar deer path that wound deeper into the woods, his sneakers squelching in the mud. Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning lit up the canopy of trees in brief, dramatic flashes. Any sensible person would have turned back, but the musical sounds were stronger today, more urgent somehow. After 20 minutes of walking, Marcus realized he had gone farther into the woods than ever before. The sounds were definitely closer now, and they seemed to be coming from a rocky area ahead where the trees thinned out. As he approached, he could see that the rocks formed a natural clearing, almost like a small canyon between two hills. That was when he saw the chains. They were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen before. Instead of the dull gray of regular metal, these chains seemed to shimmer with an inner light, even in the dim forest. They were thick as his arm and covered with strange symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The chains stretched from several large trees and disappeared behind a massive boulder in the center of the clearing. Marcus crept closer, his heart pounding. The musical sound were definitely coming from behind that boulder, and now he could hear something else mixed in with the melody, a sound like whimpering, like something in terrible pain. Every instinct told him to run, to get help, to tell an adult what he had found. But something stronger than fear drove him forward. When he finally worked up the courage to peer around the boulder, Marcus gasped so loudly that he startled himself. Chained to the rock with those strange, glowing restraints was a creature that should not have existed anywhere outside of a fantasy movie. It was about the size of a large dog, but its body was covered in scales that shifted color like an oil slick on water. Its wings, currently folded against its sides, were translucent and delicate, like a dragonfly's, but much larger. Its neck was long and graceful, ending in a head that was unmistakably dragon-like, with intelligent eyes that were currently closed in exhaustion. The creature was clearly young. Marcus could somehow tell, the same way he could tell when a puppy was still growing. But what broke Marcus's heart was the condition the creature was in. Its scales were dull and cracked, and it was so thin that its ribs showed through its skin. The chains had rubbed raw wounds where they touched its legs and neck, and the creature's breathing was shallow and labored. Whoever had done this had left it here to die slowly, and from the look of things, they were nearly successful. As Marcus stared in shock, the creature's eyes fluttered open. They were the most beautiful color he had ever seen, like deep purple gemstones with flecks of silver. When those eyes focused on him, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. It was like a voice speaking directly into his mind, not in words, but in feelings and images. The creature was afraid of him at first, which made sense given what humans had apparently done to it. But as Marcus slowly extended his hand and began speaking in the gentlest voice he could manage, something changed in those purple eyes. Hope. The creature was sensing something in Marcus that it recognized, something different from the humans who had chained it here. "Hey there," Marcus whispered, rain dripping from his hair. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." The creature tilted its head slightly, studying him. Marcus felt another wave of communication that wasn't quite telepathy, but was definitely some form of contact between their minds. The creature was testing him, trying to understand what kind of human he was. Very slowly, Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out his lunch. He had brought a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, saving them for after school. The creature's nostrils flared as it caught the scent of food, and Marcus could feel its desperate hunger like a physical thing. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, though the answer was obvious. He unwrapped the sandwich and carefully tore off a small piece of turkey. "Can you eat this? Or do you need something else?" The creature's response was immediate. It stretched its neck toward the food as far as the chains would allow, which wasn't very far at all. Marcus had to crawl closer to the boulder, close enough that he could have reached out and touched those shimmering scales. This close, he could see that the creature was even younger than he had first thought, probably just a baby, despite being the size of a large dog. When Marcus held out the piece of turkey, the creature took it with surprising gentleness. Its mouth was warm against his fingers, and he felt no threat at all, just desperate gratitude. The meat disappeared in seconds, and the creature looked at him hopefully for more. Okay, Marcus laughed softly, tearing off another piece. "But we need to get you out of these chains first. Do you understand me?" The purple eyes fixed on his face, and Marcus felt that strange mental connection again. This time, the communication was clearer. The creature understood him perfectly, and more than that, it was trying to warn him about something. Images flashed through Marcus's mind. Tall figures in dark clothes, ships in the sky, weapons that shot beams of light. The people who had chained the creature here were not from Earth. Aliens. Marcus breathed, the word feeling strange on his lips. "You're from space, and so are the ones who did this to you." The creature's response was a complex mix of confirmation, fear, and something else, pride, maybe, or defiance. Whatever species this baby dragon belonged to, they were not ones to give up easily. But right now, this particular individual was dying, and Marcus was its only hope. Marcus examined the chains more closely. The metal seemed to be some kind of advanced material, probably alien technology, just like the creature itself. The symbols carved into each link pulsed with a faint light, and Marcus suspected they were more than just decoration. They might be some kind of locking mechanism or power source. "I don't suppose you know how to get these off?" he asked the creature. The response he got was frustrating. The creature knew what the chains were, but it had no more idea how to remove them than Marcus did. They had been designed to be inescapable, at least by the creature wearing them. Marcus sat back on his heels, thinking hard. He was just a 12-year-old kid from a small town in Ohio. He didn't know anything about alien technology or how to free space dragons from magical chains. But he did know something about chains in general, and he knew a lot about not giving up when things seemed impossible. His dad was a mechanic, and Marcus had spent countless hours in the garage learning about tools and problem solving. The first rule of dealing with any stuck or locked mechanism was to understand how it worked. The second rule was to find its weakness. Marcus pulled a small LED flashlight from his backpack and aimed it at the nearest chain link. Up close, he could see that the symbols were actually tiny mechanisms, like the inside of a very complex watch. They moved constantly, shifting and changing in patterns that seemed almost alive. "It's like a combination lock," he muttered to himself. "But instead of numbers, it uses these moving symbols." The creature made a soft sound, and Marcus felt its attention focus on what he was doing. It was curious about his methods, and maybe a little hopeful. Marcus got the impression that the aliens who had chained it here had never bothered to examine their restraints this carefully. They had simply assumed that a primitive human child would be helpless against their advanced technology. That assumption might turn out to be a mistake. Marcus spent the next hour studying the chains while the storm raged overhead. He fed the creature small pieces of his lunch and gave it sips of water from his bottle, and slowly began to understand the pattern of the moving symbols. It was incredibly complex, but it wasn't random. There was definitely a sequence, a rhythm that the symbols followed. More importantly, he was beginning to suspect that the chains had a weakness that their creators hadn't intended. The moving symbols were powered by some kind of energy source, probably something that was supposed to be foolproof. But Marcus had noticed that when the creature was very close to him, when they were sharing that strange mental connection, some of the symbols moved differently. "I think the chains react to emotions," he told the creature, "or maybe to the connection between us. When you're touching my mind, they change." The creature's response was immediate and intense. It had felt the same thing, but it hadn't understood what it meant. Now, working together, they were beginning to see a possibility that neither of them could have discovered alone. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus became more and more excited about his theory. The aliens who had built these chains were clearly very advanced, but they had made their security system too complex. They had tried to account for every possible escape method except one: cooperation between species, the kind of emotional connection that they apparently couldn't understand or replicate. "We're going to get you out of here," Marcus promised, scratching the creature gently behind what he guessed were its ears. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to figure it out together." The creature's purple eyes glowed brighter, and Marcus felt a surge of determination that wasn't entirely his own. Whatever happened next, he wasn't facing it alone anymore. As the sun began to set behind the storm clouds, Marcus realized he would have to go home soon. His parents would be worried, and he couldn't afford to make them suspicious. But leaving the creature here for another night felt like abandoning it, especially now that they had made contact. "I have to go," he said reluctantly, "but I'll be back tomorrow, I promise. And I'm going to bring some real food and some tools." The creature understood, though Marcus could feel its fear of being left alone again. It had been chained here for weeks, maybe months, and the hope that Marcus represented was almost too precious to let go of. Marcus packed up his things, but before he left, he did something that surprised both of them. He reached out and placed his hand gently on the creature's snout, making direct physical contact for the first time. The mental connection that resulted was stronger than anything they had shared so far. For just a moment, Marcus could see through the creature's eyes, could feel what it felt. He experienced its gratitude, its trust, and its desperate hope that this strange human boy might actually be able to save it. But he also felt something else, a deep, ancient sadness that had nothing to do with being chained in a forest. The creature was far from home, farther than Marcus could really comprehend. It was alone in a way that made his own loneliness seem tiny by comparison. "I'll find a way," Marcus whispered. "Whatever it takes." When he finally pulled his hand away and headed back through the darkening forest, Marcus carried with him the absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. He had found something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, and somehow he was going to save it. What he didn't know was that in a ship hidden far above Earth's atmosphere, sensors were registering the first contact between human and Drachmary in over 1,000 years. And for the first time in centuries, the ancient enemy was about to learn what it meant to face human determination. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those purple dragon eyes filled with hope and desperation. He had promised to return, and the weight of that promise felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. When morning finally came, he was already dressed and ready with a plan that would have terrified his parents if they had known about it. At breakfast, Marcus forced himself to act normal while his mind raced with preparations. His father, David Chun, was reading the morning news on his tablet and complaining about politicians, while his mother, Sarah, packed lunches for everyone with her usual efficient energy. Neither of them noticed that Marcus was eating twice as much as usual and sneaking extra food into his backpack. "You seem excited about something," his mother observed as she handed him his regular lunch. "Big plans for Saturday?" "Just hanging out," Marcus replied, which was technically true. "Maybe exploring the woods a bit." His father looked up from his tablet with a frown. "Stay out of Millfield Woods, Marcus." There was another strange report last night. Someone claimed they saw unusual lights in there during the storm. Marcus's heart jumped, but he kept his expression neutral. "Probably just lightning reflecting off the wet trees." "Probably," his father agreed, but he still looked concerned. "Just stick to the regular trails, okay? And be home before dark." Marcus nodded, already knowing he would break both of those rules before the day was over. He had researched alien technology on his phone until nearly midnight, and while most of what he found was obviously fake, some of the scientific articles about electromagnetic fields and resonance frequencies had given him ideas. After breakfast, Marcus made his excuse about going to the library and set off on his real mission. His first stop was his father's garage, where he carefully selected several tools that might be useful. A small crowbar, a digital multimeter that could measure electrical fields, a set of precision screwdrivers, and a powerful LED lantern. He also grabbed a sleeping bag and a thermos from the camping supplies. His second stop was the grocery store, where he used his allowance money to buy supplies that would have seemed very strange to anyone who didn't know about his secret dragon friend. High-protein energy bars, canned chicken, and several bottles of electrolyte drinks went into his already heavy backpack. He also bought a first aid kit and some antibiotic ointment, though he wasn't sure if human medicine would work on an alien creature. By noon, Marcus was walking through Millfield Woods again, following the same deer path, but moving much more carefully than he had the day before. In daylight, without the storm, he could see signs that he had missed during his first trip. There were marks on some of the trees, strange burns that spiraled around the trunks like someone had wrapped them with bands of energy. And the deeper he went into the forest, the more he noticed that something was wrong with the wildlife. There were no birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the insects seemed to have avoided this part of the woods. The only sounds were Marcus's footsteps on the wet leaves and the distant musical calls of the creature he was coming to rescue. When Marcus reached the clearing, he found the dragon exactly where he had left it, but its condition was noticeably worse. The creature's scales had lost even more of their color, and its breathing was more labored than before. The chains continued to pulse with their alien energy, but Marcus thought they seemed brighter somehow, as if they were drawing power from the creature itself. "Hey there," Marcus said softly as he approached the boulder. "I told you I'd come back." The dragon's purple eyes opened and fixed on him immediately. The relief and gratitude that flowed through their mental connection was so intense that Marcus had to blink back tears. The creature had been afraid that it had imagined their meeting, that the hope it felt was just a dream brought on by starvation and despair. Marcus unpacked his supplies and began with the most immediate need, food and water. He opened a can of chicken and offered it to the dragon, who devoured it so quickly that Marcus worried it might make itself sick. But the creature seemed to know its own limits, and after eating, it settled back against the rock with something that might have been contentment. "Now let's see about these chains," Marcus said, pulling out his father's tools. He started with the digital multimeter, touching its probes to different parts of the chain links. The readings he got were unlike anything he had ever seen before. The electromagnetic field around the chains was not only incredibly strong, it was also constantly changing. The symbols weren't just decoration. They were components in some kind of advanced computer system. "This is way more complicated than I thought," Marcus muttered, but he wasn't discouraged. His father had taught him that the most complex machines often had the simplest points of failure. He just had to find the right weak spot. The dragon watched his work with intense interest, and Marcus could feel it trying to understand what he was doing. The creature's intelligence was clearly far beyond that of any Earth animal, and Marcus got the impression that it was learning from watching him work with tools. Its species might be more advanced than humans in some ways, but they apparently approached problems differently. After an hour of measurement and observation, Marcus had a theory. The chains were powered by some kind of energy that flowed through the symbols in a specific pattern. But the energy wasn't just electrical. It was somehow connected to the creature's own life force. The longer the dragon remained chained, the weaker it became, and the stronger the chains got. "It's feeding off you," Marcus said, and felt the dragon's confirmation. "But that means it needs you alive to keep working. So there has to be a safety mechanism, something that keeps it from actually killing you." Marcus touched the multimeter probes to the chain again, this time while maintaining physical contact with the dragon. Just as he had suspected, the readings changed dramatically. The creature's presence was definitely affecting the chain's energy flow, but in a way that the alien designers hadn't anticipated. They built these for your species, Marcus realized, but they didn't account for humans. We're different somehow, and that difference is creating interference in their system. The dragon's response was complex, agreement mixed with something like amazement. Its captors had considered humans to be primitive animals, barely worth noticing. They had never imagined that a human child could pose any threat to their advanced technology. That overconfidence was about to become their downfall. Marcus spent the afternoon working on the chains while sharing his food and water with the dragon. The creature, whom Marcus had started thinking of as Nova, because of the way its scales seemed to glow when it was happy, was getting stronger just from having regular meals and water. But the chains were still sapping its energy, and Marcus could see that time was running out. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Marcus made a decision that would have horrified every adult he knew. He was going to stay in the woods overnight. Nova was too weak to survive another night alone, and Marcus was close to figuring out how the chains worked. He just needed more time. He used his phone to send a text message to his parents, claiming that he was spending the night at his friend Jake's house. It was the first real lie he had ever told them, and it made his stomach hurt, but he told himself it was for a good cause. If he could free Nova, he could deal with the consequences later. As darkness fell, Marcus set up his sleeping bag near the boulder and turned on his lantern. The light seemed to bother the chains. Their pulsing became more erratic when the LED beam hit them directly. Marcus filed that observation away as potentially important and continued his work. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said as he worked, partly to keep himself calm, and partly because he was genuinely curious. "Are there others like you?" The mental communication that followed was the longest and most complex they had shared. Through a mixture of images, emotions, and concepts that didn't quite translate into human language, Nova told Marcus about the Drachmarie. They were an ancient species, older than human civilization, who had traveled among the stars for millennia. They were explorers and scientists, creatures of curiosity and wonder who studied the universe with the same enthusiasm that Marcus felt when he took apart old electronics to see how they worked. They were peaceful, but they were also incredibly powerful, capable of technologies that seemed like magic to younger species. And they were being hunted to extinction by the very aliens who had chained Nova in this forest. The Shadows, as Nova's people called them, were everything the Drachmarie were not. Where the Drachmarie sought knowledge, the Shadows sought only power. Where the Drachmarie explored to understand, the Shadows conquered to control. They had been at war for thousands of years, and the Shadows were winning through sheer ruthlessness. Nova was not just any young Drachmarie. It was the child of one of their greatest leaders, captured during a battle that had gone badly for the Dragon people. The Shadows had brought Nova to Earth not just as a prisoner, but as bait. They were hoping that other Drachmarie would come to rescue the young one, walking into a trap that would let the Shadows capture or kill even more of their enemies. "That's why they chained you here instead of just killing you," Marcus said, feeling sick at the cruelty of it. "You're being tortured to draw your family into danger." Nova's response was fierce agreement mixed with determination. It would die before it let that happen, but it was still young, and the chains were designed to prevent suicide. It was trapped between its desire to protect its people and its need to survive. Marcus looked at the chains with new understanding. They weren't just restraints. They were a sophisticated torture device designed to cause maximum psychological pain while keeping the victim alive. The aliens who had built them were not only advanced, they were evil in a way that made Marcus angry down to his bones. Well, they made one mistake, he said grimly. They didn't count on humans. As the night wore on, Marcus continued his work with renewed determination. He discovered that the chains responded to emotional states as well as electromagnetic fields. When Nova was afraid or despairing, the chains grew brighter and tighter. But when the young dragon felt hope or determination, especially when it was connected to Marcus, the energy flow became unstable. It's like they're designed to break hope, Marcus realized. But they can't handle it when hope comes from an outside source. Around midnight, Marcus made his first real breakthrough. By touching the chains while holding Nova's claw and focusing as hard as he could on positive emotions, memories of his family, thoughts of Nova flying free, imaginations of the Drachmarie, and humans working together, he managed to cause a complete disruption in one of the symbol sequences. The effect only lasted for a few seconds, but it was enough to prove that his theory was correct. The chains could be overloaded, but it would take more than just one human to do it. It would take sustained contact and emotional energy that Marcus wasn't sure he could maintain on his own. I need help, he told Nova, but I can't tell anyone else about you. They wouldn't believe me, or worse, they might panic and call the government. Nova's response was understanding, but urgent. The shadows would return soon to check on their prisoner. If they found evidence of human interference, they would either kill Nova immediately or move it to a more secure location. Time was running out. Marcus lay in his sleeping bag, staring up at the stars through the forest canopy, and tried to think of a solution. He needed more people, but they had to be people he could trust absolutely. They had to be people who could handle the truth about aliens and space wars without falling apart. And then, as he was drifting off to an exhausted sleep, Marcus remembered something his science teacher had said about animal behavior. Many species were capable of empathic connections that humans barely understood. Dolphins, elephants, even some birds showed signs of emotional communication that went beyond simple behavior. What if the ability to connect with Nova wasn't unique to humans? What if other Earth animals could feel what the young dragon was feeling? As Marcus fell asleep, he was already planning his next move. Tomorrow, he was going to bring help, but not the kind of help that anyone would expect. High above the forest, invisible sensors registered the emotional anomalies around the prisoner and began transmitting data to their masters. The shadows were starting to realize that something unexpected was happening on the primitive world below, and they did not like surprises. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of Nova calling to him through their mental connection. The young dragon was more alert than it had been since Marcus found it, and there was an urgent edge to its communication that made Marcus instantly wide awake. Something was wrong. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus could see strange lights moving between the trees in the distance. They weren't the warm glow of flashlights or the harsh beam of searchlights. These lights had a cold, blue-white quality that hurt to look at directly. And they were moving in patterns that no human search party would use, sweeping back and forth through the forest like the sensors of some advanced machine. "They're coming," Marcus whispered, and Nova's confirmation sent a chill down his spine. The shadows had finally noticed the electromagnetic anomalies around their prisoner's location, and they were coming to investigate. Marcus had maybe an hour before they reached the clearing, and he was nowhere near ready to attempt freeing Nova from the chains. But as he watched those alien lights searching through the forest, Marcus realized something that changed everything. The shadows were being careful, systematic, thorough, but they were also slow. They were scanning every inch of the forest, looking for any sign of interference or intrusion. That meant they didn't know exactly what had caused the disturbances. They only knew that something was wrong. "They don't know about me," Marcus said to Nova. They know their sensors detected something, but they don't know what. That gives us an advantage. Marcus quickly packed up his sleeping bag and most of his supplies, but he left the LED lantern hidden near the boulder where he could find it again. He also left half of his remaining food and water with Nova, promising to return as soon as it was safe. "I'm going to get help," he told the dragon. "Real help this time. Just hold on a little longer." Nova's response was a mixture of gratitude and fear. Not fear for itself, but fear for Marcus. The young dragon had seen what the shadows did to beings who interfered with their plans, and it didn't want its new friend to share its fate. Marcus understood that concern, but he also knew that he couldn't save Nova alone. His plan from the night before had evolved during his restless sleep, and now he was ready to take a risk that would either save them both or doom them both. He slipped away from the clearing just as the alien searchlights were getting close, moving through the forest with the stealth that only a 12-year-old who had grown up exploring these woods could manage. Behind him, he felt Nova's presence in his mind like a warm glow, giving him courage and direction even as the distance between them grew. Marcus's destination was not his own house. It was too early, and he needed to approach this carefully. Instead, he headed for the home of his friend Jake Morrison, whose family lived on a small farm at the edge of town. Jake was the kind of friend who would believe impossible things, mainly because impossible things seemed to happen around Jake on a regular basis. Marcus reached the Morrison farm just as the sun was coming up, and he could see lights in the kitchen windows. Jake's family were early risers, and they would be getting ready for the morning chores. Marcus crept around to Jake's bedroom window and tapped on the glass until his friend appeared, looking confused but not particularly surprised to see Marcus outside his window at dawn. "Dude, what are you doing here?" Jake whispered as he opened the window. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "The biggest trouble you can imagine," Marcus replied. "But also the most amazing thing that's ever happened to anyone. I need your help, and I need you to trust me no matter how crazy this sounds." Jake Morrison was 13 years old, red-haired, freckled, and had been Marcus's best friend since second grade. He was also the only person Marcus knew who might be able to handle the truth about aliens and dragons without completely losing his mind. 20 minutes later, Jake was dressed and following Marcus back into the woods, carrying his own backpack full of supplies and asking questions that Marcus answered as honestly as he could without revealing too much too quickly. "So you found something in the woods that's been making those weird sounds," Jake said as they walked. "And it's some kind of animal that's been hurt by people who left it chained up." "That's mostly accurate," Marcus replied. "But, Jake, you have to promise me that no matter what you see, you won't panic and you won't run. This is bigger than just helping an injured animal." Jake gave him a long look. "Marcus, you're freaking me out. What exactly did you find in there?" Before Marcus could answer, they both heard something that made them freeze in place. It was the sound of aircraft, but like nothing either boy had ever heard before. Instead of the roar of jet engines or the chop of helicopter rotors, this was a high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate in their bones. And it was coming from directly above the forest. "We need to hurry," Marcus said, breaking into a run. "They're here." Jake followed without question, though Marcus could see the confusion and growing alarm on his friend's face. They reached the edge of the clearing just as three sleek, black aircraft settled into a hover above the trees. The ships were like nothing from Earth. They moved without any visible means of propulsion, and their surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. From their hiding place behind a fallen log, the boys watched as beams of energy shot down from the ships, creating a dome of crackling force around the entire clearing. Then, figures began to descend from the aircraft, floating down on columns of the same energy that had created the barrier. Marcus heard Jake's sharp intake of breath, and felt his friend's shock hit him like a physical blow. The figures descending from the ships were definitely not human, and they definitely were not friendly. The shadows were tall and thin, wearing armor that seemed to be made of the same light-absorbing material as their ships. Their faces were hidden behind masks that showed no features except glowing red sensors where eyes should be. They moved with mechanical precision, spreading out around the clearing in a pattern that suggested military training and advanced coordination. And in the center of the clearing, chained to the boulder, Nova looked smaller and more helpless than ever. "That's a dragon," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's an actual dragon, and those are actual aliens, and they're torturing it. Now you understand why I needed your help," Marcus whispered back. "Nova has been chained there for weeks, maybe months. Those things left it there to die slowly, probably to attract others of its kind into a trap." Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching as the shadows set up equipment around Nova's prison. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady despite the impossible situation they were witnessing. "What do we need to do?" Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's immediate acceptance and determination. "The chains that are holding Nova are powered by some kind of alien technology, but I figured out how to disrupt them. The problem is that it takes sustained emotional energy from multiple sources. I can't do it alone." "Emotional energy?" Jake repeated. "Like feelings, like hope, determination, love, all the things that those aliens don't understand. The chains are designed to drain Nova's will to live, but they can't handle positive emotions coming from outside sources, especially from humans." Jake nodded slowly. "So we need to get close enough to touch the chains and think happy thoughts really hard." "Basically, yes. But first we need to get past that energy barrier and those guards, and we need to do it without getting captured or killed." As they watched, the shadows finish setting up their equipment and began what was clearly an interrogation. One of them approached Nova with a device that projected holographic symbols in the air. The alien was trying to communicate with the young dragon, probably demanding information about its people or their whereabouts. Nova's response was defiant silence, but Marcus could feel the creature's pain and exhaustion through their mental connection. The interrogation was causing more than just emotional distress. The device was somehow amplifying the chain's effect, draining Nova's strength even faster. "We have to do something now," Marcus said urgently. "Nova can't take much more of this." Jake was already moving, crawling backward away from their hiding place. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Marcus followed his friend to a position where they could talk without being overheard. Jake's plan was simple, dangerous, and completely insane, which meant it might actually work. "My dad's hunting rifle is in the truck," Jake explained. "Not to shoot anyone, but to make noise. A lot of noise. If I can create enough of a distraction on the other side of the clearing, maybe you can get close to Nova while they're investigating." "Jake, those are aliens with advanced technology. A hunting rifle it doesn't have to hurt them," Jake interrupted. "It just has to confuse them for a few minutes. They don't know about Earth weapons, and they're probably not expecting primitive projectile weapons in a forest where they think only wild animals live." Marcus stared at his friend. "You want to start a gunfight with space aliens to give me a chance to free a dragon with the power of positive thinking. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty stupid," Jake admitted. "But do you have a better idea?" Marcus thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "No, let's do it." 20 minutes later, Jake was in position on the far side of the clearing with his father's hunting rifle, while Marcus crept as close to the energy barrier as he dared. The plan was for Jake to start shooting at exactly 7 o'clock, giving Marcus the distraction he needed to slip through the barrier and reach Nova. At 1 minute before 7, Marcus heard Nova's voice in his mind, faint but determined. The young dragon had sensed his presence and was preparing for the rescue attempt. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. At exactly 7 o'clock, Jake's rifle cracked across the clearing like thunder, and chaos erupted among the shadows. The aliens had clearly never encountered gunfire before, and their reaction was immediate but confused. Several of them raised weapons that shot beams of energy toward the source of the noise, but Jake was already moving to a new position. The energy barrier flickered as the shadows redirected their attention and equipment toward this unexpected threat. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted across the clearing and dove through a gap in the barrier just as it was reforming. The sensation was like running through a waterfall made of electricity, but he made it through with only a tingling sensation and the smell of ozone clinging to his clothes. Nova saw him coming and lifted its head as much as the chains would allow. Marcus could feel the dragon's desperate hope mixed with terror for his safety, but there was no time for reassurance. Jake's distraction wouldn't last long, and Marcus had to make the most of it. He reached the boulder and immediately placed both hands on the nearest chain link, focusing every positive emotion he could summon. The effect was immediate. The symbols on the chains began to flicker and dance, and the energy flow became erratic. But it wasn't enough. The chains were fighting back, trying to maintain their hold on their prisoner. That was when Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. Through his connection with Nova, he could sense other minds reaching out to help. The wild animals that had fled the area during the aliens' occupation, deer, rabbits, even the birds that had been hiding in the deep woods, were responding to Nova's distress calls and Marcus's desperate need. One by one, creatures began to emerge from the forest around the clearing. They approached the energy barrier fearlessly, driven by an instinct older than fear. A deer touched its nose to the crackling energy. A hawk landed on the barrier itself, its wings spread wide. Dozens of smaller animals, squirrels, chipmunks, even field mice, pressed themselves against the alien force field. And, incredibly, impossibly, their combined life force began to resonate with the emotional energy that Marcus was channeling through the chains. The shadows noticed the animal behavior immediately, but they clearly had no idea what it meant. Their sensors were detecting massive energy fluctuations throughout the clearing, but they couldn't understand the source. How could primitive Earth creatures pose any threat to their advanced technology? They were about to find out that they had seriously underestimated the power of life itself. Marcus felt the moment when the chain's energy flow reached critical instability. The symbols were now changing so rapidly that they blurred together, and the metal itself was beginning to vibrate with harmonic frequencies that seemed to come from the Earth itself. "Come on," Marcus whispered, pouring everything he had into the connection with Nova. "We can do this. All of us together." That was when the first chain link shattered like glass, sending sparks of alien energy cascading through the clearing like falling stars. The moment the first chain link shattered, everything changed. The alien energy that had been contained within the chain links didn't simply dissipate. It exploded outward in a wave of pure force that sent every shadow stumbling backward and caused their equipment to spark and malfunction. The energy barrier around the clearing flickered and died, leaving the wild animals free to surge forward into the space where their new ally was fighting for his life. Nova roared, the first sound Marcus had heard the dragon make with its voice instead of its mind. It was a sound of pure joy and relief, musical and powerful, that seemed to resonate in the bones of every living thing in the forest. The remaining chains began to crack and spark as the young dragon's renewed strength fought against their alien restraints. But the shadows recovered quickly from their shock, and their response was immediate and deadly. Energy weapons snapped up to target Marcus, and beams of coherent light began to slice through the air around him. Only Nova's desperate warning through their mental link let him dive behind the boulder in time to avoid being vaporized. "The boy," one of the shadows spoke in a voice like grinding metal, translated somehow so that Marcus could understand it. "How does a primitive mammal interfere with Drachmary containment technology?" Another alien, apparently the leader based on the additional markings on its armor, moved closer to examine the shattered chain link. "Impossible. The restraints are coded to Drachmary neural patterns. No other species should be able to affect them." Marcus pressed himself against the boulder, feeling Nova's warmth against his back as the young dragon strained against the remaining chains. 3 of the 4 anchor points were still intact, but the dragon was no longer completely helpless. Through their connection, Marcus could feel Nova gathering its strength for something. The creature was preparing to fight, even though it was still chained and weakened. On the far side of the clearing, Jake's rifle cracked again, drawing the attention of two shadows who moved to investigate this continuing annoyance. That left four aliens focused on Marcus and Nova, still more than enough to handle two children and a partially restrained dragon, but better odds than they'd had a minute ago. That was when Marcus realized that the wild animals hadn't retreated when the energy barrier fell. Instead, they had spread out around the clearing, watching the confrontation with an intelligence that seemed far beyond their normal behavior. The deer that had first touched the barrier was now standing less than 20 feet from the nearest shadow, its head raised and its eyes fixed on the alien with unmistakable challenge. "What are they doing?" Marcus whispered to Nova. The dragon's response came with images and emotions rather than words. The animals were responding to something they had never encountered before, an alien threat to their world. Every creature in the forest could sense that the shadows were wrong, unnatural, dangerous to everything that lived and grew on Earth. And somehow, through their connection to Nova, they understood that Marcus was the key to stopping that threat. The shadow leader was examining the shattered chain with increasing frustration. The energy disruption pattern is unlike anything in our databases. The human child's neural activity should be too primitive to interface with Drachmary technology. Perhaps the species is more developed than our initial surveys indicated, another shadow suggested. The humans have achieved crude spaceflight. Their neural patterns might be more complex than we assumed. Marcus listened to this exchange with growing understanding. The aliens have been watching Earth, but they clearly hadn't been watching very carefully. They saw humans as primitive animals, barely worth their attention except as potential slaves or resources. They had no idea what humanity was actually capable of when it was motivated to protect something it cared about. "You made a mistake," Marcus called out, standing up from behind the boulder. "You thought humans wouldn't care about one alien dragon. But you don't understand. Humans always care about things that are hurt and scared and need help." The shadows turned their attention to him, and Marcus felt their contempt like a cold wind. To them, he was just a young animal making noise, no more threatening than the deer that had touched their barrier. "The human child speaks," the leader said with what might have been amusement. "Do you understand what you have interfered with, small mammal? This Drachmary spawn is our prisoner, taken in honorable combat. Its people are our enemies, and it will serve as bait to draw more of them to their destruction." "I understand that you're bullies," Marcus replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "And I understand that bullies always underestimate the people they pick on." One of the other shadows raised its weapon, apparently deciding that this conversation had gone on long enough. But before it could fire, the deer that had been watching charged forward with a speed that took everyone by surprise. The animal slammed into the alien's legs with enough force to knock it over, then bounded away before the other shadows could react. That single action was like a signal to every creature in the forest. Suddenly, the clearing was filled with animals attacking the invaders, not with the mindless fury of rabid beasts, but with coordinated precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Squirrels leaped from tree branches to land on the aliens' heads, clawing at their sensors. Birds dove from the sky to strike at weapon hands. Even the mice contributed, running between the shadows' feet and causing them to stumble at crucial moments. The aliens were clearly unprepared for this kind of assault. Their weapons were designed to fight other advanced species with energy shields and technological defenses, not swarms of small, fast, indigenous creatures that attacked from every direction at once. In the chaos of the animal attack, Marcus saw his chance. He lunged for the second chain anchor point, pressing both hands against the alien metal and focusing every ounce of determination he possessed. This time, with Nova fully conscious and fighting alongside him, the effect was even more dramatic than before. The symbols on the chains began to glow white-hot, and cracks appeared in the metal itself. But the effort was taking everything Marcus had. He could feel his strength draining away as he fought against alien technology that was designed to be unbreakable. Just when he thought he might collapse from the effort, he felt new strength flowing into him through the mental connection with Nova. The young dragon wasn't just receiving help. It was giving it back, sharing its own powerful life force with the human boy who was risking everything to save it. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone, and that combined strength was something the chain's designers had never anticipated. The second anchor shattered with a sound like a crystal bell being struck by lightning. Now Nova was held by only 2 chains, and the dragon was getting stronger by the moment as it was freed from the technology that had been draining its life. Marcus could see the creature's scales beginning to regain their iridescent color, and when Nova spread its wings for the first time since he'd found it, they caught the morning sunlight like stained glass windows. The Shadow Leader saw what was happening and screamed commands in its own language. The other aliens broke off their futile attempts to fight the forest animals and converged on Marcus and Nova, energy weapons charging for lethal shots that would end the rescue attempt permanently. That was when Jake Morrison proved that humans could be just as surprising as any alien dragon. Marcus's friend came crashing through the underbrush on the back of a 4-wheeler ATV, the hunting rifle slung across his back, and a backpack full of his father's welding equipment bouncing behind him. He had clearly decided that subtle distraction wasn't working, and it was time for a more direct approach. The ATV hit the nearest shadow at full speed, sending the alien flying across the clearing to crash into a tree with bone-breaking force. Jake leaped off the vehicle as it skidded to a stop and immediately began setting up a portable cutting torch from his father's garage. "Marcus," he shouted, "I don't know how to fight aliens, but I know how to cut metal." The torch ignited with a brilliant blue flame, and Jake advanced on the 3rd chain anchor point with the determined expression of a boy who had spent his whole life learning to fix things that were broken. The remaining shadows opened fire, but their shots went wild as the forest animals continued their coordinated assault. A hawk struck one alien's weapon hand just as it was about to shoot Jake, sending the energy beam harmlessly into the sky. A raccoon somehow managed to activate something on another alien's belt, causing its armor to emit a high-pitched whine and clouds of acrid smoke. Marcus felt Nova gathering its strength for something major. Through their connection, he could sense the dragon preparing to use abilities that had been too weak and constrained to access before. The young Drachmarie might be a prisoner and far from home, but it was still a member of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. "Get back." Nova's mental voice was stronger than Marcus had ever felt it. "I'm going to break the final chain, but the energy release will be dangerous." Marcus grabbed Jake and pulled him away from the boulder just as Nova began to glow with an inner light that was brighter than the sun. The dragon's scales shifted through every color of the spectrum, and the air around it began to vibrate with harmonic frequencies that made Marcus's teeth ache. The remaining shadows realized what was about to happen and tried to retreat, but they were too late. Nova had endured weeks of imprisonment and torture, and now it was free to respond with the full power of its heritage. The young dragon opened its mouth and sang. It wasn't the roar of an earth animal or even the musical calls that Marcus had heard from a distance. This was something far more profound, a sound that contained frequencies that human ears couldn't fully process, harmonics that seemed to resonate with the fundamental forces of reality itself. It was the song of a species that had been traveling between stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. The final 2 chains didn't just break, they disintegrated, reduced to component atoms by forces that the shadow technology couldn't resist or contain. The energy release was like a small nuclear explosion, but instead of destructive radiation, it released waves of pure life force that washed over the clearing like a warm wind. Marcus felt that energy flow through him and was amazed by the sensation. It was like being plugged directly into the universe itself, feeling the connections between all living things as a tangible reality. For just a moment, he could sense every creature in the forest, every blade of grass, every bacterium in the soil, all of them linked together in a vast web of life that the shadows would never understand. When the light faded and Marcus's vision cleared, Nova stood free for the first time in months, its wings spread wide, and its scales gleaming with health and power. The young dragon had grown during its captivity, not physically, but in some deeper way that Marcus could feel but not fully comprehend. It was still young, still learning, but it was no longer helpless. The surviving shadows were retreating to their ships, clearly recognizing that they had lost this particular battle. But as they rose into the sky, Marcus heard the leader's voice one last time, amplified by alien technology so that everyone in the clearing could understand it. This is not finished, human child. The Drachmarie spawn is free, but it is still far from its people and still weak from its imprisonment. We will return with greater force, and next time we will not underestimate your primitive species. The ships disappeared into the morning sky, leaving behind only the scorched earth where their weapons had struck and the shattered remains of the alien chains. Marcus looked up at Nova, who was now standing tall and proud despite everything it had endured. The dragon looked down at him with those incredible purple eyes, and the gratitude that flowed through their mental connection was so intense that it brought tears to Marcus's face. But mixed with the gratitude was something else, worry, and a determination that Marcus recognized because he felt it himself. The shadows would return, probably with more ships and better weapons. And when they did, they would be ready for human interference. They're going to come back, Marcus said. And next time, it's not just going to be about rescuing you. They're going to see Earth as a threat. Nova's response was complex, agreement mixed with apology and fierce protectiveness. The young dragon hadn't meant to bring danger to Marcus's world, but it was here now, and they would have to face it together. Jake walked over to stand beside Marcus, still holding his father's welding torch and grinning despite the impossible situation they were in. So, he said conversationally, "I'm guessing this means our lives just got a lot more complicated." Marcus looked at his best friend, then at the free dragon, then at the forest full of animals who had just helped fight an alien invasion, and started to laugh. "Jake," he said, "I think complicated doesn't even begin to cover it." 3 weeks after the battle in Millfield Woods, the world had changed in ways that most people were only beginning to understand. The story of 2 boys and an alien dragon had spread far beyond a small town in Ohio, carried first by social media posts that everyone assumed were elaborate hoaxes, then by increasingly serious news reports as evidence mounted that something extraordinary had actually happened. Marcus Chun sat in a conference room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, still having trouble believing that military officers and government officials were asking for his advice about defending Earth from alien invasion. Beside him, Jake Morrison was drawing technical diagrams that showed how ordinary Earth animals could be trained to detect alien technology, while Nova, now healthy, strong, and nearly twice the size it had been when chained, provided commentary through the translation device that Dr. Sarah Kim had developed. Dr. Kim was a xenobiologist who had been called in when the government realized they needed someone who could study alien life forms. She was also, Marcus had discovered, one of the few adults who had immediately understood that Nova was not a pet or a weapon, but a person deserving of respect and protection. The pattern analysis is clear, Dr. Kim was saying to the assembled officials. The electromagnetic signatures that Nova generates are completely different from anything the shadow ships emit. That's how our wildlife was able to distinguish between them so quickly. Earth animals have been evolving alongside natural electromagnetic fields for millions of years. They can detect technological signatures that our instruments might miss. General Morrison, Jake's uncle, as it turned out, which explained a lot about Jake's fearless approach to impossible situations, leaned forward with interest. "So you're saying we could train dogs and birds to work as an early warning system?" "Not just dogs and birds," Jake interjected, looking up from his drawings. Everything with a nervous system seems to react to alien tech differently than to Earth technology. Even the mice knew something was wrong when the shadows were around. Marcus nodded in agreement. It's not just detection, either. When all those animals worked together to help free Nova, they were somehow amplifying the disruption field I created. Dr. Kim thinks it has something to do with bioelectric fields interacting with alien technology in ways the aliens never planned for. Nova's translated voice joined the conversation, the artificial tones unable to completely disguise the warmth and humor that Marcus could feel through their ongoing mental connection. My people have studied many species across the galaxy, but we have never encountered anything quite like Earth life. Your biological diversity is extraordinary, and the way your species cooperate when faced with threats is inspiring. Admiral Chun, no relation to Marcus despite the name, had been skeptical about working with an alien, even one that had been tortured by humanity's enemies. But over the past weeks, Nova had proven its value as both a